Welcome to Headlines and History, live news reactions and your views. We're about to go live soon, so grab your spot and get ready for a sharp, balanced take on today's biggest news stories with a dash of historical insight. Stay tuned. Each week, we tackle the headlines that matter: politics, economics, global events with a balanced lens. We'll react live, tie today's stories to historical moments, and spotlight your views in the chat. From trade talks echoing the 1990s to crises recalling 2008, we're here to unpack it all. Your voice drives the show. Share your thoughts or historical parallels in the live chat, and we'll dive into the best ones. It's news, context, and community all in 1 hour. We're moments away from launching Headlines and History. Stick around for live reactions, historical nuggets, and your chance to chime in. Hit the notification bell, prep your comments, and let's make sense of the news together. See you soon. Welcome back. Tonight, or today, we're going to be looking at a string of rulings and political clashes that, I find very interesting because you find it happening only when a Republican president is in office. First, a federal judge has halted the deportation flights of Guatemalan children, and I would like to add that they are unaccompanied. Now, the planes were literally turned around on the tarmac after a last-minute court order. Is this judicial activism on full display yet again, or a reminder that even presidents must obey child protection laws? We're going to talk about that phrase because I wonder how protected these kids are when their parents are nowhere to be found. Second, another judge in Los Angeles declared that President Trump's use of the National Guard was illegal. He says he violated the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, this ruling could ripple into other cities where the administration is planning similar deployments. And I believe that that's the plan. They want this to affect the future plans of the Trump administration to crush crime in these blue cities. They've seen what had happened in Washington, and they're like, if that comes here, we're never going to win another election in this state because we let crime run so rampant. Third story, Chicago is facing a fallout from a violent Labor Day weekend. Dozens were shot, and now city leaders are clashing with Washington over whether federal troops or ICE should step in. Is this necessary? Is this a necessary intervention or yet another accusation from the left of government overreach? Let me know in the live chat. And then fourth story we're going to be looking at is a federal appeals court has just ruled that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal, throwing his signature trade policy into doubt. The decisions set up a showdown at the Supreme Court and raises a bigger question. How much economic power should any president really have? And these questions always come up, always, when it has to do with either Trump or a Republican president. The Democrats have a signature move, all right? Now, we've called the tariffs a signature policy of Donald Trump, but really the Democrats have a signature move. Any administration that isn't them, they just unleash their activist judges on. So these are the four stories, and there's only one theme across these four stories. The courts and the blue cities are pushing back against the Trump administration. Let's call it what it is, and we'll break it down and really see what's at stake. Right. So we're going to jump into the first story, and it has to do with the unaccompanied minors who are being sent back to their families. And a federal judge says, hold up, we need to keep those unaccompanied kids. Even though we're sending them back to their families, we want to keep them. And I hope, we can get some common sense out of this story. So let's jump in.
Back here in the States, a federal judge has ordered an emergency halt to the Trump administration's plan to deport more than 600 Guatemalan children. They are staying in the U.S. in government-run shelters for now. Fox's Bill Maluzhin has the story.
Today, you saw something extraordinary in Washington, D.C., and by extraordinary, I mean disgusting.
Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche outraged after D.C.-based federal judge Sparkle Suknanan, a Biden appointee, blocked the Trump administration from deporting hundreds of Guatemalan children back to their home country.
Yeah.
Some of the planes were sitting on a Texas tarmac when the judge's order came down, with children seen deplaning and getting into vans, heading back to government-run shelters in an uncertain future. Judge Suknanan saying in part, quote, "I have the government attempting to remove minor children from the country in the wee hours of the morning on a holiday weekend," which is surprising, but here we are.
So that is I want to say, I'm going to call it out. That is stupid. Okay, there are flights that leave the country at the wee hours. So this isn't about when the flight was leaving. It's about the fact that they just want to block yet another Trump administration move to return illegal immigrants back to their countries. And then, children are like a soft target. It's like anything that has to do with children, the Democrats would use to their advantage and say, "Oh, look, he's deporting these children," and they don't add the fact that these are unaccompanied minors. Their families aren't in the country with them. Who's taking care of these children? Who's speaking up for their welfare? Not the Democrats. These kids are only pawns in the game that they're playing.
Attorneys and advocates for the children sued the Department of Homeland Security, arguing the deportations were illegal and the children would be sent back to peril in Guatemala with no due process. The Trump Justice Department argues that the children had been smuggled across the southern border illegally and alone and were being reunited with family in Guatemala.
And what would have happened to these children while they were on the trail into the United States? Look, I don't know about you, okay, but many times when I see stories like this, it affects me in very deep ways because I have children. And when I see how these people use children as pawns in their game, irrespective of what happens to these kids, they couldn't care less what happened to these kids until the Trump administration located them. Now, these are 600 out of over 300,000 kids that are missing from the Biden years. Nothing is being said about those kids. Whatever they're going through, whatever hell they're going through right now, no one is talking about it. The only thing that they're talking about is how the Trump administration is racist and fascistic for finding these children who still don't have anyone taking responsibility for them and returning them to their homes in Guatemala. Now, I have a question. Should I put up a poll, all right? And the poll is this: should the Trump administration return these unaccompanied minors to their families in Guatemala, or should the U.S. keep them? All right. Now, I have, I have in the past put up polls, and people tend to, watch the live stream but don't exactly follow and use the poll. So answer the polls, okay? Because it's important. Now, I have one person who's answered the poll and said that the U.S. should keep the unaccompanied minors. And let me tell you a story that it circulated the news just a couple of weeks back, and mainstream media was screaming bloody murder. Volodymyr Zelensky accused Russia of stealing their children, and these were children who were found by the Russian army, in the aftermath of a battle. So these are clearly unaccompanied children, and the Russian army takes these children back to Russia because what should they do? Leave them there in the perilous state that they were in? Allow them to trudge through wilderness and war-torn spaces into God knows what? the Russian army took them back to Russia. And what did Volodymyr Zelensky say? That they were kidnapped, that they stole their children. Okay, now I'm not running in interference for the Russian army. I'm just saying, look, in a situation like that, what should the Russian army have done? Should they have left the children in peril, or should they have found a way to secure them and take care of them? Because let me remind you that Ukraine and Russia share a boundary, and most Ukrainians who live closer to the Russian border identify more as Russians than Ukrainian. So there is a very, their histories and their heritage are interwoven. So there's that in that conflict. So the mainstream media complains that Ukraine has their children stolen by the Russian army. And then here we have the United States finding children in the aftermath of a horrendous border policy by the Biden administration, and is attempting to return them to their families. All right. You see, the cognitive dissonance of the left is so obvious that when you see it, you can't believe that they are so reckless in their stupidity. These kids are being returned to their families, and someone says, let's keep them. Please make it make sense. Make it make sense. All right. You're returning them to their families. Now, the claim is that they are going back to horrendous situations in Guatemala. Any third world country is seen as horrendous when you compare it to a first world country, because you can see that there's a difference in quality of life and so on, and that's granted. However, there is the thing that a lot of people on the left like to bring up whenever they're having these conversations about the role of families. The left doesn't value the nuclear family. They don't. So whenever you see these kinds of conversations going on and they want to separate children, they accuse the Trump administration of separating children. And then now that the Trump administration is trying to reunite them with their families, they are blocking President Trump. Well, yes, Cody says, what families? They sent them here. That's the thing. That's the thing. Look, I agree, but is there any documentation that says, okay, I want you guys to adopt my kids? All right. Now, this is it's a very weird situation. You're finding out that these kids were smuggled across the border unaccompanied. The parents or the families sent them there, granted. However, we need to do things the right way. All right. So let me ask the question, since Cody, put up a comment, and I agree with Cody that most of the families would have sent them there because they felt that they're young. If they survive crossing into the United States and they grow older, they would send money and help back to Guatemala to them. I agree. All right, that's agreed. But we're talking about doing things the right way. Okay, we're talking about doing things the right way. So now that we know that these unaccompanied minors exist and there's no one taking responsibility for them, and they are vulnerable to the whims of very bad actors in the United States, let me ask a question. What should the United States do? Should they do what Russia did and keep the children and process them through the adoption and foster system? You do know that the foster system in the United States is overwhelmed. I hope you do know that it's overwhelmed, and you now have potentially over 300,000 unaccompanied minors, potentially, if we're going to do what I've suggested, put into the foster system to be adopted by American families. Should we be advocating for that? Should we be advocating for that? Because these weren't minors who anyone was able to track. These were located after the intense investigations of ICE, and they were found, and they were vulnerable, they were unaccompanied, and they needed to be returned to their families. So while we're on the live stream, put up your comments. Let me know what you think the solution should be. All right. So we have people who want to keep the unaccompanied minors. All right. I have that sentiment too. if there was the option of returning these people back to whatever discomfort they were in before they went through the horror of crossing over illegally into the United States, okay, if there was an option on how to solve this problem, let's have it in the chat. Let's know, what do you think the solution should be? Return them, and already I'm seeing in the poll that people want to keep these kids because life in the United States will be infinitely better than life in Guatemala. However, there is the issue of these people having families, all right? And we need to have, we need to balance this carefully. And honestly, right now, this is a political story. It's a political story, and I want us to we will talk about the politics of it, but let's talk about the humanity of it as well, okay? The humanity of this story is, these are children who, if they live in the United States and are cared for by proper families, and they are raised and eventually grow up to become decent American citizens, they would be a net positive for the United States, but not in this condition where they are unaccompanied and uncared for. They could be absorbed into gangs and trafficking rings and so on. There's a lot of uncertainty surrounding them right now. So the question is, what do you suggest the Trump administration should do? Should they reunite them with their families? Or what do you think your solution, the best solution should be? So let's have it in the chat. Let's wrap up this video, and then I will be looking at the chat to find out, what you guys are saying. And please vote in the let's vote in the poll, and then let's see what we come up with.
Who sought their return.
In the
There
end.
you have it again, a local judge that's thwarting not only what President Trump is promising to do to deliver to the American people, but here we have children who should be returned to their parents.
White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller slammed the decision on X, saying, quote, "The Biden judge is effectively kidnapping these migrant children and refusing to let them return home to their parents in their home country."
And this is the same thing that, like I said, the mainstream media accused Vladimir Putin and the Russian army of doing to the Ukrainian children. And of course, we know that Melania Trump wrote a very touching letter to Putin when he visited in Alaska and was basically talking about the Ukrainian children. And that is all well and good when it's a different country doing it. Now that the United States is being urged by the left to do this, are they raising the same outcry and outrage that they did about the Russian army keeping children, unaccompanied minors, in Russia? All right. So I want us to be very level-headed in our conversations. These are real people. These are real children. They have real families. And to be honest, like I said, the families would have sent them there. Now, let me tell you a story of what used to happen in Nigeria in the 80s, because I grew up in Nigeria and I knew this was happening. In the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, a culture in Nigeria started where families who couldn't feed their children or send them to school would ship their kids off to families in the cities with an agreement that they would keep their children, possibly send them to school, okay, in an elementary school, a public elementary school, or a public middle school and high school, so that those children would serve as nannies and helps in the house. And it was clear why they did that. They couldn't take care of their kids. And I've seen this happen in Nigeria, and it's not lost on me that families would actually send their unaccompanied children to a different country, believing that when they got there, they would have a better life. So it's not lost on me. It is possible. However, we need to look at the whole picture and try to figure out, okay, so what's the best solution in this case? Because if the Trump administration decides to keep over 300,000 unaccompanied children in the United States, what would it look like? I'm still waiting for comments and suggestions in the chat, so let me know what your thoughts are before we switch over to the next story.
And HHS, which has cared for the children, agrees they should be with family in Guatemala.
These children should be reunited with their parents.
And that federal judge's order will block DHS from deporting any of these Guatemalan children while the legal process plays out over the coming weeks.
All right, so again, another legal quagmire that the Trump administration has to wade through. There's a video from TDSBC, so we'll just play it and then we will give our thoughts on this story. Don't forget to leave a comment. Don't forget to vote in the poll. Currently, it's 100% that the United States should keep the unaccompanied minors. It's 100%. So if you're watching and you don't agree, and the poll ends at 100%, it's on you. So you can go in there and make your voice heard.
This is new video that we're now just getting in from South Texas. You're watching Guatemalan children deplaning aircraft just outside of McAllen, Texas. We have learned that hundreds of Guatemalan children were set to be deported by the...
Not hundreds, 600 unaccompanied Guatemalan children, 600. Mainstream media will hide these numbers because it's important that they keep the story and the facts as vague as possible and then put a heavy layer of their narrative on top of the whole story. So it's always good to have the facts when you're listening to them.
The Trump administration this weekend, in the middle of the night, lawyers for several of these children going to court and saying that the federal government was pulling them from their beds, put them on buses and took them to the airport without having gone through asylum hearings or other immigration procedures.
All right, so you're talking about a minor, an unaccompanied minor, engaging a lawyer to file for asylum. These are things that, there are laws on the books about what a minor can and cannot do. And unless they are emancipated, and in this case, they are not even American citizens. They are not subject to the laws that cover citizens. It's very important that we identify that fact. They aren't citizens. So when you're talking due process, you can't give due process that is bestowed on American citizens to people who aren't citizens. These are people who came into the country illegally. Look, guys, I'm an immigrant. I lived all my life in a third world country. I know how it is. I know what it looks like. I know how it feels. But we can't say that we will take leave of our senses in order to back a narrative. We need to speak the truth about these things. And we need to think clearly about how these things could play out. Now, I've said if you have a suggestion about how this should be handled, leave a comment, vote in the poll, let us know what your thoughts are so that we can actually have a well-rounded solution to this problem. Trump bad, or Trump administration bad, or ICE are evil, wicked people who are racist is not an argument. It's not, those aren't arguments. Those will not solve anything. We have to have conversations to say, okay, what exactly can we do? What alternatives do the Trump administration have? What do the American people want the Trump administration to do about these 300,000 unaccompanied, in some cases missing children? So it's very important that we kind of stand on our own 2 feet and have a real conversation about these things.
Upon the news that one of the aircraft with some of those Guatemalan children had already taken off, the hearing was held here in Washington, D.C. the federal judge ordering that plane to be turned around and those Guatemalan children to be returned to the Texas government facilities.
So these are Guatemalan children, not American children that are being taken out of the country. They are simply being returned. And this is MSNBC just giving the narrative. We already know what the story is. And to be honest, I think that there's a lot to be said about how these stories are covered. Let's look at the comment section on TDSBC. And true to form, it opens up with one of their very loyal viewers saying this: "This regime is vile. They manage to hit a new low every single day by returning kids to their families. It's a new low." I can't imagine how scared those poor children are. Can you imagine how scared they've been without their families, without anyone looking out for them? You're not saying anything about that. You're not. And this individual is thanking the lawyers for fighting this evil. So when people call something good evil and call evil good, it tells you a lot about their worldview. William Good says child trafficking charges should be brought against some people regarding this. Now, are you saying that the Trump administration is trafficking the children back to their families, go back to their home country? I don't exactly know what's going on. Tim Norton says, "I'm so ashamed of my country. I never thought I'd say that." Well, are you ashamed that your country let in these unaccompanied minors? And God knows what has been happening to them since, in fact, all through their trip across the wilderness into and across the border with coyotes who have been known to abuse minors and women along the trail. You're not thinking about that, are you? Someone else says, "Despicable that this was happening." Thank you, Judge. You see, when this is another resident of the TDSBC ecosystem, all right? What was despicable? That they were trafficked across the border. The Trump administration found them and is returning them to their homes and their families. Or you're now accusing the Trump administration, who is actually attempting to do something good, of being despicable. Another TDS patient over here. If they haven't assessed their asylum claims, who would actually believe they have vetted those that they're returning them to? Another person who doesn't know how rules or laws work. These are minors, not adults. And they crossed illegally. Asylum claims are really up in the air. You need to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that your life is at risk. Asylum is for people whose lives are at risk, maybe as political targets or their countries are war-torn. So the kids have to prove beyond all reasonable doubt that they are in danger. And that involves documentation, photos, all kinds of documentation to show that they are really, really at risk. Just saying I'm coming from a poor country really isn't going to cut it for most of these immigration cases, unless a judge that is favorable to the leftist cause sits on the case and decides that everyone who comes in and claims asylum gets to stay, simply because it will upset the Trump administration. So let's look at the comments on the Fox News side. The Guatemalan president is on record saying he personally requested these kids to be returned home. All right, so a federal judge, if this is true, and I haven't seen this confirmed, let me know in the chat or in the comments section if this is true. That the president requested for his citizens to be returned home, and a federal judge says, no, we're not returning your citizens because we want to piss off the Trump administration. Really? If this is true, it's going to get weird really fast. Who else wants to see Newsom resign immediately? Good for nothing, recalled, never again. Okay, this isn't part of the story, but they clearly want to jump in on this. Let the judge house and feed them at her place. She is kidnapping them if their parents are waiting for their return. Yeah. But of course, as we saw in the chat, in many cases, the families sent them over to the United States. But honestly, the conditions that they've been living under must be really, really hard. All right, so one more. They might be minors according to our law, but in these heartrending save the children, but in all these heartrending save the children cries for mercy, these are pretty big children. In their own country, they would be young adults. Okay. Granted, because in some of these countries, kids are exposed to a lot of hardship. A lot of hardship. All right. So that's it for this story. We're going to be jumping over to the next story where another judge, another amazing leftist judge, decides that the Trump administration's intervention in Los Angeles was a bad idea. In fact, they called it illegal. So let's listen to that and give our feedback on it. And don't forget, you can still vote on the poll. The poll might go down or it might stay up because this is a really deep story, and I think a lot of people have to respond to it. Right now, we are at 100% that we should, that the United States should keep the unaccompanied minors. So if you're watching this after the fact, you need to get more involved in polls like this. And this is what happens in politics. You have a poll that's out there. One side seems to have access to these polls. And when the polls are being read out on TDSBC, they claim that this is what America thinks. Meanwhile, the conservatives either didn't get the opportunity to take the polls or really don't bother taking the polls at all. And this is why you should vote. You should vote. If you don't like the way things are going in your country, you really do need to vote. So let's move on to the next story before I go on a tirade about you taking responsibility for electing the right people.
Federal judge says the Trump administration illegally used National Guard troops in California immigration raids. Judge Charles Breyer ruled the deployment violated federal law, but didn't order the troops removed. California argued the troops broke a law barring military enforcement of domestic laws. The Trump administration claimed the troops were protecting federal agents and not enforcing laws, and they were deployed under presidential authority. Neither the Trump administration nor Governor Newsom have commented yet on the ruling. Also this morning, 2 LA sheriff's deputies are recovering after they were struck by a suspected drunk driver.
All right, so if a federal judge, sorry, did he say that he was a federal judge in LA? Well, a judge in Los Angeles, and I assume is a federal judge, claims that the Trump administration's use of the National Guard was illegal, citing that they were only protecting federal officials. Well, they were protecting American citizens who happen to be federal officials because the state refused to send in protection. They refused to send in the police to protect these citizens working within their state. All right. The ICE agents were cornered in the federal building by the mobs that had been ginned up by Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass. Things were getting out of hand. They didn't lift a finger to send the police to help them. And so the National Guard had to be mobilized to protect American lives. Whether you like the Trump administration or not, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. You have to be able to look at a story and break down the ramifications of what this story would have looked like if certain things weren't done. So you have people firebombing a building, attacking federal officials who are not allowed to engage civilian mobs that have been weaponized by the local governor and mayor. And so how do you counter this without creating a spectacle for the left to continue to mule and sing and accuse the Trump administration of breaking the law? You use another legal apparatus called the National Guard. And it's called the National Guard, not the State Guard. So all the calls about Gavin Newsom and the Maryland mayor claiming that the National Guard shouldn't be used in that way, they are the National Guard because they are brought in when certain situations escalate beyond the control of the local authorities. And for the period of the riots in LA, the local authorities behaved as if they were deers in a headlight. They didn't know what to do. And so the National Guard had to be called in. Now, this is a Fox report, and let's see if, do we have any alternative? We have another outlet. So let's listen to this and see if we have a different perspective on this news.
Breaking news this morning, a federal judge ruling the Trump administration violated federal law by sending National Guard troops to Los Angeles amid the immigration enforcement protests in June. The San Francisco-based judge did not require the remaining troops be withdrawn. California sued the Trump administration, saying the troops violated a law that prohibits military enforcement of local laws. Lawyers for the administration argued that law did not apply to the troops because they were protecting federal officers and property.
Okay, so this kind of gives it a different spin. Like it's interesting to watch how these things play out. And usually when they wind up at the Supreme Court and the Supreme Court justices hand down a ruling that is definitive, usually we don't hear about it, or we hear about how the Supreme Court needs to be packed. Here's a situation where the National Guard was called in. There was a dispute about whether the National Guard was truly under the federal government and whether they took permission about releasing the National Guard. That is still up in the air. The National Guard were used to control and to deal with the civil unrest happening there. And then the troops were called in to protect the federal agents. So that's the distinction. And the problem with this story is that when you hear the reports, the details get watered down or blurred. You don't know whether they're talking about the National Guard or whether they're talking about the federal troops who were called in to protect the federal officials. So it's a very interesting look at how the news gets reported. And the reactions in the comments section usually reflects this confusion. So let's take a look at the comment section. Here we have, so another federal judge, the first comment here says, so another federal judge is refusing to adhere to the rulings of SCOTUS. SCOTUS already ruled that using the National Guard to protect ICE agents is constitutional. Therefore, this judge is ruling based on something other than the U.S. Constitution. Okay? Now, do you agree with his take on this? Let me know in the chat or in the comment section. Too many judges have never passed the bar or have any law license, which is required to be a lawyer. Why are there no requirements for some judgeships? It's a question, but that's an accusation because we don't know if they actually did pass or failed. So let's move on. These judges are just begging for the guard to arrest them. Okay, that is an extreme take. Absolutely begging. Every one of them is blatantly disregarding their oaths and the Constitution. Well, the National Guard it isn't meant to do stuff like that, so that isn't going to fly. Supreme Court will overrule anyway, which is what I said. And then when that happens, we are going to have Democrat leadership screaming about how the court needs to be packed. How ignorant can these people be? Don't you want an end to the existence of violence? What's wrong with that? All right, now let's look at the comments on Fox News. amazing how these judges and all their gated communities with tall walls are telling us what's safe and not safe, which is a valid statement. Our National Guard is for our protection in any state in America. Next comment says political rulings, they should be ignored. Maybe investigate the judges for who they have ties to and for possible payments for these rulings. Okay, well, that's a question, and honestly, if any administration goes down the road of investigating a judge that happens to stand on the opposite side of the dais, to them, it's going to spell or smell of, okay, this is another political witch hunt, this is another. But you know what? The left did it all the time during Biden's 4 years. And the mainstream media loved it. But if the Trump administration attempts, even hints at doing something like that, okay, there will be an uproar. And they'll say, look, the tyrant and the dictator is showing his true colors. One final comment. These Supreme Court judges should put an end to this. We are past fatigue with these lower federal judges abusing their positions. Let me tell you the truth. As long as there are no consequences to their actions, they will continue to do it. As long as federal judges continue to not face the consequences for blatantly ignoring a Supreme Court ruling and doing exactly what they said they shouldn't do, or intentionally finding loopholes to work around these rulings, they will continue to do it. We still have about 3.5 years of the Trump administration. It's going to be an exciting 3.5 years. And we're going to see more of this, unless there are consequences. Now, the Republicans are notorious for just being softies. They don't do the things that Democrats do. They don't do the things that these leftists do. They don't put their political opponents in jail. The Republicans don't put their political opponents in jail. All right? The Democrats will happily do that. So that's the difference between these two parties. And when the Republicans decide to play the game that the Democrats play, the Democrats get up and say, how dare you? How dare you? But you've been doing it for years. Like, look at the gerrymandering situation. Chicago, Illinois, and California have gerrymandered their states into oblivion. Okay, these are blue states for the rest of the existence of the United States, unless something drastic happens. These are blue states because all the Republican strongholds have been gerrymandered out of existence. They did it for decades. And then once the Republicans get smart and wisen up and start doing the same thing, they start saying, oh, how dare you? We're going to gerrymander as well. You've been gerrymandering for decades. So I think that the Republicans should grow a spine and start either playing the game that the Democrats have asked to be played, okay, and do it lawfully, legally. These things need to be handled legally. If a judge is actually violating the law and needs to be disbarred and disrobed, I mean, that should happen if they continue to do stuff like this, because now they are interfering in the duties of the executive branch. There's a question about whether this ruling, if it holds, can ripple into other cities that need National Guard intervention because of the kind of challenges that they face. And speaking of challenges that blue cities face, we're going to go to the next story and discuss Chicago. Over the weekend, there was some violence that broke out in Chicago. We're going to listen to the story. I haven't gone through the story yet, so we're going to be going through this experience together. Don't forget to let me know what you think in the comment section. Now, before we proceed, I don't want to be rude, and I want to ask a few questions. All right. Now, I've given you my opinion. My opinion is my opinion. But what is your opinion on this? Should presidents ever use the National Guard or Marines for domestic law enforcement without the Insurrection Act? Because that's some of the legal conversations that they're having. All right. So should presidents ever use the National Guard or the Marines for domestic law enforcement without the Insurrection Act? I've said many times or several times over the last few streams that one of the problems that we see with the situation with law and order and how the extreme reactions that have to be called upon to fix a problem comes from the fact that the people who caused the problem did such a horrendous job. So you have these blue states and cities going to the extreme to create a hellish existence for their citizens, where law and order is broken down, the criminals have all the guns, and people are scared to walk the streets at night. And they leave these situations unchecked for decades. And then when they see a president positioning himself to protect the American people, what do? They get up and they begin to engage in these shell games to figure out a way to do something over here in California that blocks him from doing something that is needed over here in Illinois or Chicago. So let's listen to this report and give me your thoughts in the chat.
So Democrats in Illinois refusing help from President Trump as he zeroes in on Chicago after a violent holiday weekend that left dozens hurt and at least 7 dead.
And Mike Tobin is live on the streets of Chicago this morning and joins us now with the latest. Mike.
Good morning, Ainsley. Good morning, guys. So far, the numbers we have show 54 people were shot, 7 fatally. It usually takes a few hours for Chicago police to release the official numbers from the holiday weekend.
This is crazy. That many people got shot over this weekend in a city with massive gun control. Of course, we will have the conversation around, oh, we need more gun control. You've taken all the guns from the law-abiding citizens. You've defanged them. You've told them, look, you have no right to defend yourselves. And then this has given crazy individuals license to go out there and do what just happened in Chicago.
But you compare those numbers to the 4th of July weekend, in which 44 people were shot, 6 were killed. This is the dynamic that Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker says is not an emergency that warrants the intervention of federal troopers and the National Guard. In fact, Governor Pritzker launched over the weekend the conspiracy theory that Trump is using crime in Chicago to cheat the midterm elections.
Now, look, you can't make this up. When Democrats say these things with a straight face. Okay, so yes, there's crime in my city. And how dare he use the fact that I have a problem in my city to win the midterm elections? I mean, help me understand this dynamic, okay, if you can. Someone has a problem, and usually in politics, the opposition can say, look, these people here are doing a horrible job. And then the person doing the horrible job says, how dare he say I'm doing a horrible job? He's trying to use the fact that I'm doing a horrible job to win the elections. That's politics. And mainstream media is literally reporting this. They're telling you exactly how they think. You are not supposed to react when a horrible job is being done. You're supposed to take it. Let your city be crime-ridden. And if you say anything about it, you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a this phobe and that phobe. It's unbelievable that I'm hearing this, honestly. Unbelievable. Let me know what you think in the chat, because I'm wondering if I heard right, okay? Because this is weird.
Other aims are that he'd like to stop the elections in 2026, or frankly, take control of those elections.
All right, now see, this is another thing that keeps happening, and I find it disgusting. I find it disgusting. There is no evidence, of course, that President Trump is planning to stop the 2026 elections. The Republican Party is having such a massive momentum and resurgence since 2024, since the 2024 presidential election cycle. So when Democrats step up and lie like this, their party is in shambles. It's in shambles. There's no leadership. There's no cohesion within the Democrat Party. And people like J.B. Pritzker sits in front of the camera and says that, okay, I'm going to tell you what President Trump is planning to stop the 2026 elections. How does that make sense? His party right now is on a roll. He can't wait for 2026 to come faster. So it's just asinine to hear them say this.
He'll just claim that there's some problem with an election, and then he's got troops on the ground that can take control, if in fact he's allowed to do this.
Also over the weekend, Chicago's Mayor Brandon Johnson led groups chanting "No federal troops in Chicago," and in a move critics dismiss as clearly political, Chicago's mayor signed an executive order banning law enforcement from wearing face masks, and he said that Chicago police will not play a supporting role to their federal counterpart.
That's a nice way to show support for your local police. When your city is overrun by criminals and these law enforcement agents have families in the city, and you expect them to go out into the community, show their faces, enforce the law, and put their families at risk. Well done, Brandon Johnson. Well done. Stellar leadership. Because they pretend like they really have the safety of the troops and the police at heart, but they continue to put out stupid policies like this that puts people at risk. These are the guys who were chanting "defund the police" during the Summer of Love. You remember them? Yeah, these were the guys. So let's not forget that this is what they did. Okay, someone says, "Oh, but you're a Christian. Why don't you forgive?" I didn't say I was upset with them. I said, don't forget, you don't have someone who's proven, who has a track record of simply being evil, and then you decide that you conveniently forget that they are that way. That's not how sane and rational people work. Okay, you need to remember what these people did, what they really stand for, so that when they start acting out their policies, it shouldn't surprise you. Okay?
We're going to defend our democracy in the city of Chicago. We're going to protect the humanity of every single person in the city of Chicago. No troops in Chicago. No troops in Chicago.
And how about you make your city safer? I mean, is that too much to ask? That's the job you were voted in, or at least I expect he was voted in. That's the job he was voted in to do. Okay? You just keep your people safe. Keep your people safe, and there will be no need for National Guard troops to come to your city.
Now, Willie Wilson, a Chicago businessman and one-time mayoral candidate, says the mayor, the governor, and the Democrat Party have failed the people in Chicago who live with the violence.
I support President Trump on this one. There's a lot of things I do not agree.
All right, so this marks the end of his Democrat career, because you don't break out on your own and say stuff like this. Okay, so that's the end of his career.
With what he might have done or going to do, but on this one here, crime, I support him 1,000%.
And as we reported last week, Great Lakes Naval Base just north of Chicago is preparing to house some federal personnel, as the only real promise we have of federal intervention comes from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem, as she is promising a ramped-up immigration crackdown. Guys, back to you.
All right, Mike Tobin, live in the streets of Chicago. Mike, thank you.
The man he interviewed, Griff, sorry, you were about to talk. The man he interviewed, Willie, he went on to say, he said the mayor and the governor have a lot of security around them.
Yep.
But what about the security around the people?
And that's what I keep saying about these talking heads and politicians, even the independent, so-called independent leftist voices that continue to support these dangerous Democrat policies. All of these people have private security. They can afford private security. So to hell with the regular guy, to hell with John Q, who's over there, who's suffered multiple burglaries. His house has been shot at multiple times. His neighbors get carjacked routinely. His city is unsafe. Everyone is home by 5:30 and no one goes out. And don't believe all of that. All of you are really safe. You're really safe. If you're feeling unsafe, it's really about what Trump is doing in Washington, D.C. So our people feel unsafe, not because their streets are flooded with crime and illegal guns, but because President Trump is keeping another city safe. The insanity of the conversation from the left is just breathtaking.
Well, that's exactly right. Like, I would love to see Mayor Johnson or Governor Pritzker walk one weekend by themselves with no security through the south side of Chicago, just by himself. And not only would he realize...
Oh, no. They look, and if they tried that publicity stunt, it wouldn't work because, of course, they'll step out and they want everything to be a photo op. There will be cameras, there will be vans rolling along the sidewalk while they're doing all that. That wouldn't be real, authentic, or organic. If they actually did that in real life, here's what would happen. They would get mugged. And then they would claim that it was a right-wing nut job who has been weaponized by President Trump's rhetoric, and that's why they were attacked. Not because they've ensured that their own streets were unsafe. No, it's always somebody else's fault.
Is that despite what any crime stats show, people don't feel safe because you're seeing more than 40 shot, 7 dead. And Mike Tobin was talking about back on 4th of July, 44 shot, 6 dead. It just, the reality on the street defies the stats and these politicians saying don't come in. To say no troops on our streets is essentially saying, Ainsley, just leave our crime alone. We like our crime just the way it is. We don't want your help to come in and try and stop it. And that's why when we played that montage of these Chicago residents, they want help because who doesn't want safety? Listen here.
It's just gone from bad to worse to disaster.
No one really feels safe. It's impossible to feel safe in a city like this, especially with the leadership we have.
These kids are carrying guns like around the ages of 8 years old,
Look
and
at
they're
that.
killing other 8-year-olds.
Are you joking? 8 years old? 8. Wow. And these are black people talking. So it's not about if it was a white person talking, they'll say like this person is racist. Of course, they'll call this person a sellout for speaking the truth.
Kids with guns. It's insane.
My opinion, not enough police officers. The police officers' hands are tied.
So the police is really unappreciative for offhand under Brandon Johnson, Lori Lightfoot, J.B. Pritzker. Those are 3 are the reason why nobody don't want to be a police.
Their policies when it comes to crime is not working at all.
I think the biggest piece of the pie has to be more police officers, more protection. That's what the people want.
They are denying the obvious in Chicago. And Chicago is just the latest example of what's happening in every progressive city. Death, poverty, destruction. I remember when I was in Chicago for an interview one time, And one of the guys that was on our security detail was a local cop for the Chicago Police Department. He left for a carjacking because it was in the area.
These guys walk around with these high-power firearms. Where did they get them? These are the criminals. The criminals know how to get these things illegally, and the law-abiding citizens are so choked up that it's insane. I'm seeing these things, and I'm trying to understand how the voters in these cities will continue to vote for these insane policies.
The cops arrived to the scene and they realized, well, the guy that was just carjacked didn't own his car either. You got two carjackers carjacking each other. I had an interview with a family that daughter was murdered, 8 years old, in the middle of her front yard, just playing with her friends. They were so aggrieved that when they had to put her back together, that they had to put a tie over her head just so they couldn't see a scar and they could have a proper burial. I mean, I can give you stories for days, and I would call every single local politician, the mayors, the DAs, and ask them, can you give us an interview? Can you meet with the family, tell them what you're going to do to stop this? None of them would ever agree to do an interview with Fox and Friends, or when I worked on Sean's show, or when I had my show on the weekend. It was years and years of the same thing. So now you got a president that advocated and said, look, I'm going to go and advocate for the forgotten men and women. You know what? That means these liberal cities as well. And now they want to resist finally a glimmer of hope. We saw what happened with D.C. They've already turned that problem around. Yes, they got some ways to go, but now you have the National Guard, the feds there, and the criminals are on the run for once.
And the Democrats know that this is a losing proposition, and all they want to do is head off the Trump administration and make sure that they don't actually do these things in their cities. Because if the Trump administration sends in the National Guard into these cities, all right, now I don't want to sound too optimistic, because saying that, it means that the Democrats will never win an election in those cities is just being way too optimistic. It's way too optimistic. Because many of these blue cities have committed. I would say committed. I would love to say brainwashed, but that would not be charitable. So they have committed supporters who are blue no matter who. They vote Democrat even if their house was on fire. And in spite of the fact that there's tragedy all around them, they will continue to make these decisions.
The Democratic Party is failing people who live in these communities. And we just interviewed Dr. Amen, and he said, get your children moving. That helps them with their mental health, because we're seeing so many kids on medicines. He said, get them moving, get them outside, let them run around. Well, you can't if you live in the south side of Chicago. That little girl was playing in a front yard, and she was shot and killed.
I interviewed one kid. He's 13 years old, and him and his cousin are...
Look, I don't know what it means to feel so unsafe that your children can't even step outside. I don't know what it means, because yes, I lived in a third world country, but not in the part of the country where stuff like that could happen. However, I do know what it means not to feel like your children can play in the street in front of your house within a gated community, because some lunatics who don't know that they shouldn't drive above 80 kilometers an hour on a residential street live in the same gated community. At least I know that I didn't feel safe having my kids play outside because of those individuals. Now, I live here in North America, and I still have an element of PTSD when my kids are playing out on the streets, riding their bikes, and I see a car coming. I still feel like, okay, what's going to happen? Because I did have those situations where these cars just speed by. They don't regard speed limits or traffic laws. They have a fast car, they want to drive fast, and they go. So at least I know about that, but not to be able to feel safe even on your own front porch. It is It's crazy. It's crazy.
Feuded. I go, how? This is your cousin. Your dads are brothers. He goes, well, my cousin lives on the other side of Chicago. That means that we can't hang together because the gangs right here run this block and the gangs run this other. You're robbing kids of a future.
I know, of a childhood,
it shouldn't
too.
be
You're
that
right.
way.
Yeah, so that's the situation in Chicago. I asked a question in the chat. What measures, if not troops, would actually cut shootings the fastest? All right, so let me know in the chat what measures. I asked the question about the kids being returned to their families in Guatemala. I said, look, if you don't agree with what the Trump administration is doing, let me know in the chat what suggestions you have. And so far, crickets. I'm asking a question now about the Trump administration's use of the National Guard in blue cities, especially when it has to do with violent crime. And so we have all these politicians stepping out and saying, okay, the Trump administration didn't have to send the National Guard into these cities. Okay, you guys have been dealing with violence, not even dealing with it, letting it run rampant in your cities for decades. And you didn't do anything. Okay, so now that your cities are the center of attention, okay, what are the suggestions that you would make about a different way that law and order can be returned to your city? The same thing, crickets. They say, well, they were all for law and order, but not the way Trump is doing it. Okay, so tell us your solution. Crickets. So that's the stupidity. I'm going to use that word very often. The stupidity of what we see on the left. They continue. They don't disappoint. These leftists don't disappoint. They will continue to say and do the same things. Now, let's see this report, because this is the same narrative that we continue to see. Here's NBC News, all right, and they have this video where they claim that Chicagoans, they want help tackling crime, but with a different approach than Trump's crackdown. We want the solution, but not the solution.
The Trump administration is facing legal setbacks on two fronts: immigration and trade, the president's signature issues, as the White House is planning to further expand its immigration crackdown and possibly send federal troops into Democratic-run cities like Chicago. In a dramatic moment yesterday, a federal judge...
All right, hold on. I don't want to waste our time. Let's go straight to the news about Chicago.
Like President Trump has told us to do.
The president has repeatedly criticized and attacked Illinois Democratic leaders as he threatens to expand his crime crackdown in Democratic-led cities like Chicago and send in the National Guard. Today, protests in the Windy City over those threats after Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an executive order this weekend aimed at protecting, quote, the constitutional rights of Chicagoans amidst the possibility of imminent militarized immigration.
So, So according to these Democrat politicians, it is your constitutional right to be robbed, to feel unsafe even on your own front porch, and to be deprived of protection even when the federal government is offering it. Correct.
Or National Guard deployment by the federal government. Meanwhile, Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker has called the threat to deploy troops un-American.
No one in the administration, the president or anybody under him, has called anyone in my administration and me have not called the city of Chicago or anyone else. So it's clear that in secret they're planning this. Well, it's an invasion with U.S. troops.
Yeah. Signature move of Democrats. Fearmonger, conflate, distract, deflect, don't answer the question, don't solve the problem, as long as you can make the other person look bad.
They, in fact, do that. They ought to let us know when they're coming, where they're coming, if it's ICE or if it's ATF or whoever it is. But they don't want to do that either.
Well, I don't work for the Trump administration, and I don't know what's going on in there. And honestly, I don't put my stock in putting my confidence in men or people. Okay, the Trump administration they have their agenda. They are people. They are not. I've said it again and again, and I'll say it on this live stream. He's not Jesus. All right, he's not here to save you. He's here to do a job, and that job just happens to line up with things that make common sense. Now, whatever the his other motives for doing this are concerned, honestly, they sure beat leaving an open border, trying to take families' rights away from them so that they don't have the right to parent their own children properly, putting inappropriate books in schools and claiming that the conservatives want to remove books and ban books when they're talking about sexually explicit books that 3-year-olds are being introduced to, and on and on and on. If we went through all of the insane, godless, demonic policies that the Democrat Party has been rattling off over the last decade, okay, that would be a live stream all on its own. And when you have someone who decides, okay, I'm going to stand against that, I want to put power in the hands of the families once again. I want to keep government out of the families, and I want to keep men out of women's sports. How is that evil and bad? All of these things are common sense policies that he's been enacting that good people everywhere should support. But TDSBC and NBC News and the like want you to just hate him and anything he does. That's their playbook. They've been doing that since the 60s. Okay, now some of us don't believe it, but when you watch some of the statements that Ronald Reagan made in, I think it was in Face the Nation or Meet the Press. I think it was one of those interviews he had, and he just rattled off every single thing that we see the Democrat Party and left-wing media doing today. They were doing it back then in the 70s and the 80s. They haven't changed their playbook. We just didn't see it. Okay, our eyes were not open to these things. Now that our eyes are open to these things, we can't unsee it. It's everywhere. They've been doing it for decades. They only got away with it because they didn't have someone like Donald Trump calling them out on their nonsense. Once he came down that escalator, the masks were off. And for me, that was actually where I began to notice this insanity that we're seeing today on full display.
And I must say, it's disruptive. It's dangerous. It tends to inflame passions on the ground when they don't let us know
use those
what
words.
their plans are.
And joining me now from the White House is NBC's Vaughn Hilliard. NBC's Adrian Brodus is in Chicago with the latest on the ground. And NBC News senior Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley will join me in a moment on set. But Vaughn, I'll start with you. The administration is planning again to scale up this immigration enforcement operations, this time in Chicago. Why there?
Chicago is a place that, number one, it's a Democratic city, with Brandon Johnson, the mayor, already taking proof.
No, Chicago is a violent city. We politicize things that have no business being politicized. If there are rats in a house, whether it is Republican or Democrat, there are rats in the house. It's really a very simple thing. It shouldn't be confusing. Confusing situations because you're trying to politicize things, and because yes, it's coming through a political scenario or context. It tends to make people feel like this is political. But let's look at the details. You have people unsafe in their own city, people being slain on their own front porch, people who can't even go out to have a meal at a restaurant because they're afraid of going out and being carjacked on the way there or being shot at on their way home. And all that has been happening. And the only thing that the Democrats and the leftists have to say is that the sitting president, who happens to be Republican, sending the National Guard to come to crush crime in your city is simply because it's a Democrat city. If you're watching, help me understand this in the comment section. Help me understand this. Because this, I keep watching the news. Sometimes I take a break. Like I took a few days, to go on a retreat this weekend. Took a break off the news. And then I come back to this insanity. And it's like, what am I looking at? All right? So there's going to be a statement that they're going to put out there, just like the people in Washington, D.C. said. And that's this. Of course, he's claiming that this is happening because it's a Democrat city. Okay, fine. It's a Democrat city. Fine. And they're going to say that crime is down. Okay, fine. So if crime is down, how come there was this horrendous spike in crime over the holiday weekend? Why? Why? If crime is down, why do we still have all these people saying the same thing about how dangerous your city is?
Preemptive orders to prepare for the surge in federal agents on the ground and potentially the National Guard. And of course, J.B. Pritzker, somebody that could very well run for president as a Democratic candidate come 2028, somebody who has been eager to take on the president and his policies here in 2025. And when you're looking at the crime statistics, you are looking at, yes, a place where crime has dropped. But day to day, there are still a number of shootings that take place and deaths. And the president, over the course of the last 48 hours, has been consistently pointing to crime that has taken place in this major American city. And
all right, so I'm going to go to the comment section, to the chat or to the comment section of this story. But I'm going to put up a poll. All right, I'm going to put up a poll, and I'm going to be doing it right now in real time. Should President Trump abandon these blue cities? Okay, to the crime wave that they definitely have gotten used to. Okay. It is a very simple question now, because you have the constant insane reaction coming from these the leadership, the Democrat leadership of these blue cities. Don't bring the National Guard. Don't protect us. Leave us alone. We want to, leave the crime the way it is. Nothing is happening here. Crime is down. And yet you continue to see these reports about how people are being killed even on their own front porch. Let's see the comment section in MSNBC. Fighting crime is a win, period. Yep, that's a very common sense comment over there. Chicago wants help. Listen to the majority, not the loud minority. Speaking of the loud minority, those of you who are watching and didn't take the old poll, I've taken down the old poll. The old poll says, should unaccompanied minors be returned to their families in Guatemala, or should the U.S. keep them? And we had the votes going one way, saying keep the unaccompanied minors. And then I've put up another poll asking a question. Should President Trump abandon the blue cities to their crime wave? The poll is up. So don't let it be the the loud minority taking the poll. Right, so Chicago wants help. Listen to the majority, not the loud minority. And another comment says, so why hasn't it been a different approach? We, the people, want to see change. So why hasn't the condition changed? We talk around and around the issue, but nothing changes. It all stays the same. Why? Because you guys keep voting in the same people. All right, there's no consequence for failure. The politicians are rewarded with even more responsibility as they continue to fail upwards. So there's no incentive for them to do the right thing for the American people. There's no incentive. They continue to say the nonsense they say, and they keep getting voted back. Nobody's primarying them. No one is really going after them at the polls. And I'm not talking about the opposition. I'm saying the voters. You have institutionalized Democrat membership in families. And that's where I would, blame the issue. We have families that have been Democrat for generations with no good reason, and they continue to vote these characters back into office who say the stupidest things, do the stupidest things, cause harm to your communities, and they still get voted back into power. That is why these things continue to happen. It's just the bottom line, okay? And honestly, like I said, Illinois and Chicago have been gerrymandered into being Democrat strongholds for the rest of the existence of the United States. There's no coming back from that unless something crazy happens. All right. 53 people shot and 8 killed yesterday alone in Chicago. Send in the National Guard now. Of course, they've been told to stay out, according to Brandon Johnson. Chicago's had decades to clean up their act. Now the adults need to come in and clean up. Well, they say it's illegal, so they don't want the adults to come and clean up. Let's read this, and then we'll switch over to Fox News' comment section. Crime rate falling 80 or 90% in a week will make the Chicago mayor and governor look really bad. If the National Guard are there, crime will plummet 80 to 90% in a week. Then people will be asking, what do we need you, governor and mayor, for? So the two will try everything to stop the crime rates from falling. I did say that in my response to all this nonsense that we've been seeing on the screen. On the Fox News side, walk around with a 10-man security detail saying that crime isn't a problem. Yes, they continue to do this. They gaslight you into believing that everything is safe. They want you to say, oh, the city is safe, while they surround themselves with security. Illinois Democrat Governor Pritzker doesn't care about Chicago. Are you kidding me? Every weekend in Chicago, 40 or 50 people are shot every weekend. What a joke. Okay, now I don't know about those stats, so let me know. Confirm the stats in the comment section or in the chat if you're watching in real time. And I would like to invite you to please watch, to be a part of the live recording, because these clips are eventually going to circulate. But if you want to be part of the conversation, please do your best to join the live stream. And speaking of which, please consider subscribing, liking, and sharing the video. Hit the bell icon so that whenever I go live, you'll be notified. And if you're able to join, and then join in the conversation. I got the hell out of Chicago in 2021. BLM riots, defunding the police, and tyrannical COVID policies were enough for me. I had to leave my hometown after 50 plus years. It's bad. Okay, that's someone who claims to be a former citizen of Chicago. Chicago's governor needs to resign immediately, and also the mayor. Very disgusting. No, they will not. They will not resign. These people have no shame. All right, they have no shame. They sit in front of the cameras, lie blatantly, get fact checked, and do you know what? Even after they get fact checked, they come back and they tell the same lies that they were fact checked publicly about. They have no shame. 54 shot, 7 killed. They really know how to celebrate the holiday weekend. Jackson is still twiddling his thumbs, and Pritzker is at an all-you-can-eat buffet again. The only thing Pritzker cares about is his next meal. Okay, now, this is what I think about name calling and all of that. I think it's hilarious. However, it doesn't solve a problem. Name calling, like the left does, doesn't solve the problem. So I would suggest that you come with the facts. Come with the facts. All right. So we're going to be jumping over to the last story. And the last story is one of those stories that makes you, I'll tell you something. All right, I love the United States. The United States has been good to my family. And if you ask me, it's been historically good to its citizens. There have been quite evil people who have had the opportunity to get into power and use that power to destroy the American society, the American family, the American communities, and the policies that made America great. And every time I see it, it breaks my heart. And you have, on top of all of the politicians that literally hate America and the people in intelligentsia who are essentially Marxists, jealous of the accomplishments of people who literally are doing, not talking. All right, people in the intelligentsia love to talk. They love to belittle you and tell you to educate yourself, that they are more educated. You have to listen to them and worship at their feet. But they hate people like Donald Trump who have gone out there and built businesses that have been a blessing to families. I did a video a few months back in response to all of the accusations about how Trump was a failure, how 6 of his businesses went bankrupt. And, you know, I have this video that went viral and got over 1.7 million views. And the bile that you see in the comment section against Donald Trump is just insane. And then most of the comments are like, oh, this guy is a joke, you know, bankrupt. So I decided to do some research and say, okay, is it true that he really went bankrupt? And I didn't know that Donald Trump, you know, has had 500 businesses. 500. And only 6 out of the 500 went bankrupt. I didn't know that. But you wouldn't if you listen to the insanity coming from the left and those that have been brainwashed by their propaganda. 6 went bankrupt. 500 out of 500. All right, so that means that he still has 494 businesses running. And because he's successful, okay, you have TDSBC releasing videos that say how the Trump administration or how the Trump family enriched themselves through the White House. I think stupid is going to be the word that I will continue to use because it is allowed in polite conversation. All right, so it is a very stupid way of thinking, a very stupid way of seeing the world, a very stupid way of telling stories. And I'll continue to call these guys out because there's no way that well-meaning, sane people will see what's going on and agree with what the left has been doing. So the federal court or a federal judge, once again, a weaponized federal agent of darkness, rules that some of Trump's tariffs are illegal. Let's have a listen.
Fox Business Alert, a federal appeals court ruling moments ago that most of President Trump's tariffs are not legal. The ruling goes into effect October 14th.
And let's turn it over to our own Lydia Hu. Lydia.
Hi, good evening to you both, Dagan and James. This decision coming out just in about the last 30 minutes. It is decided by the Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit and is being handed down on a per curiam basis, meaning not issued by any one particular judge, but on behalf of the entire panel, which in this case was 11 judges, which is unusual by most standards. Usually we would have a panel of 3 judges. That was really seen as a signal of just how critically important this case was.
It's how desperate these judges are to push a narrative, because now we don't have judges, we have activists. Have you noticed how under Democrat administrations you don't see these kinds of clown shows going on? in the court system or in the legal system. Is it that conservatives are so weak-willed or so ignorant or lily-livered, same thing as weak-willed, that they don't know the way to the courts and they don't have judges in the legal system? It's just a question. Or is it just that conservative judges are so conscientious that they are unwilling to do anything that gives that lends a precedence to a potentially constitutionally damaging ruling that could affect the American people? I hope that came out right. Because I keep wondering, where are the conservative judges when Democrats are in office? Where are they? Does it mean that there haven't been rulings in conservative regions? There have, but it's usually because an individual brought a lawsuit. Usually, it isn't that a judge stands up and rules against an executive function of the president. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't live in the United States, okay? Maybe I'm wrong. Let me know in the chat or in the comment section if this is normal, if conservative judges have done the same thing to Democrat judges. I haven't watched U.S. politics as closely as I have over the last 5 years. I haven't. In my earlier, years, everything, I was looking at the world through ruby-tinted glasses. Like, the world is nice. There's nothing wrong going on, until I began to see all the insanity going on in the world with the super cold that turned the world upside down and everything else, and the mainstream media refusing to tell the truth and calling for the cancellation of anyone who didn't toe the party line. We saw all that happening, and if that didn't wake you up, all right, then I don't know what to say to you. But you have all of these things happening. When will you wake up to see that there's something wrong with this picture? Federal judges ganged up to block an executive function. Yes, I'm sounding even, and but it's really frustrating because I'm asking a very real question, because people need to see what's going on. People need to see what's going on, and to be honest, it needs to stop. Will it stop? I don't think so. The only way it stops is when the conservatives in America, who, by the way, outweigh and outnumber the progressives. How do I know that? Because America is literally being carried on the backs of the conservatives that live in the Bible Belt and in other regions where industry is being created, in Utah, in all these other places where people are working hard to take care of their families and to love their communities. All right, while the activists are calling for more taxes on those people that create jobs and that build up the country. So conservatives outnumber the progressives. So what should what should the conservatives do? Get out and vote. It's really that simple. Because this insanity does have to stop, but it won't stop unless something happens at the ballots, okay?
To this judicial body, 11 judges deciding this case. And to your point, they decided that Trump's use of the IEEPA tariffs, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, used to implement the fentanyl tariffs as well as the universal reciprocal tariffs, is not permitted by IEEPA. So they are affirming the lower court that initially decided that, and they are giving until October 14th for this decision to go into place. That means for now, Dagan and James, those tariffs will still remain in place. Just to remind everyone, this case was brought by a group of 5 businesses as well as a group of roughly a dozen Democratic attorney generals who challenged these IEEPA tariffs essentially on the grounds of a separation of powers issue. Very simply stated, they basically said the power to impose tariffs belongs to Congress and only the president can do so in a few limited circumstances. And finding that there is a national emergency based on the flow of drugs, these attorneys generals and the small businesses argued did not rise to an emergency level, and that was the heart of their challenge, and this appellate court is essentially agreeing with them.
So when you look at the American economy, right, and usually these people expect lay people not to do their homework, and to their credit, they're right, because lay people don't do their homework. When you look at the American economy is trillions in debt. I don't have the debt clock up on my screen right now. The American economy is trillions in debt. The average American citizen is not giving birth to enough children to have, they are not giving birth to children at replacement levels. So you have potentially a society in decline, population-wise. You have leftists like the Bill Gates of this world claiming that the world will fall out of its orbit if more people are born, and that we're sucking up all the oxygen, and so we need to depopulate the earth. You have people like that being given, a big megaphone by left-wing media, and then in the schools, children are being told not to have children, to get a dog, and if you must have children, have one. And then when they circle back to say, okay, but we don't have enough people to do the jobs, their response is not have more children. Their response is throw open your borders and let total strangers and potentially savages into your country who don't know anything about how your country was built, how your country runs, and they literally hate your country. Let them in to destroy everything because they already destroyed their country. Let them in. And remember, we're talking about undocumented illegal immigrants and people who were let in legally but hate the United States. And sometimes I wonder why they're there. This is what we're dealing with. And the economy is buckling under the fact that you have a declining population. You have people who come in who don't know how to run things, and infrastructure is declining. You have people who are running the country who don't know how to run a simple economic system. They're printing money. Inflation is through the roof. And then you have countries that are tariffing the American businesses out of existence, creating a dystopian situation where America becomes Nigeria, where they can't even make toothpicks. Everything has to be made in China. And then America is at the mercy of China because they make everything in China, including their medication and drugs. And eventually, if the situation in Taiwan continues and America doesn't fix the chip situation, the microchips that runs the military industrial systems that the American people need to protect themselves, look, it continues to cascade. I can keep rattling these things off, and I don't live in America. So when President Trump uses the emergency, tariff thing that he uses to bring these other countries to the table, for example, the whole situation with fentanyl, he had two options. One, spend billions, hundreds of billions of dollars on the U.S. border, north and south, to prevent the influx of fentanyl that's killing hundreds of thousands of people in the United States, which is a national emergency. If the judge doesn't know what that is, that's a national emergency. If hundreds of thousands of people were dying, not because they were sick, and if they were sick, that's also another emergency, but they're dying because another country is allowing fentanyl to poison their citizens, that's an emergency. I don't live in America, and I'm so heated up about this matter. because it is unjust. That's why it's unjust. You have someone who is trying to protect his country, and you have these activist judges blocking him from protecting the average citizen. We've seen what's happening in Chicago and the madness in California and other blue cities. If I didn't know better, they want America gone. They want to destroy every trace of the Christian roots that built up the United States, because all the policies that they're bringing up are so antithetical to biblical principles. All right, that's enough for my rant. Let's go back to the story.
Very clearly, this is now setting up an argument that will head to the U.S. Supreme Court. So I would anticipate we're going to see a writ of certiorari, which is a request for judicial review to the High Court, and or an emergency petition being filed in the not too distant future. A couple of practical notes here that the Trump administration has been very clear in emphasizing all along the way. You know, Trump selected, they say, the use of IEEPA tariffs because of the flexibility, his ability to implement them in a speedy fashion. But that's not his only option here. So I believe that moving forward here, we'll likely hear them talk about other options that President Trump likely has to impose tariffs in the absence of the IEEPA tariffs.
All right, so that's the breakdown from Fox News. We're going to look at, let's see what TDSBC has to say. And of course, they're happy that an activist judge is shutting down the Trump administration's moves to make America great again. So let's hear from TDSBC.
I want to pick up on something. Neil Katyal argued this case. He says his hope is that the administration does not take this to the Supreme Court, but in fact takes it in the direction that the court suggests, which is Congress to discuss this. I have no such hope. On one hand, Congress seems to...
Well, if they wanted... Look, the problem with what Ali Velshi just said is that they want you to do what they want, but not what the process is. A federal court or team of judges blocks the Trump administration from doing what they do. And instead of them appealing through the legal process, they want to push it to Congress, where all things go to die. Okay? They take it to Congress, and then, of course, that's where the lobbying kicks in. That's where all the backroom dealings kick in. That's what they want. All right? And Ali Velshi clearly wants the backroom dealings to take place. You attacked the Trump administration on a legal basis. So he has to defend himself in the court. And if the federal courts ruled against him, where should he take it? To the Supreme Court, where you have these justices, these 9 justices, reading the Constitution, reading the international legal precedents, and then interpreting the law. So the Democrats and their mouthpieces, at TDSBC, have shown their hand. They're hoping that Donald Trump doesn't push this to the Supreme Court and get a ruling from the legal system, because it's really about the interpretation of the law. And if a lawyer or if a judge tells you that this is his interpretation of the law, it is for the Supreme Court to step in to say, look, this is the letter and the spirit of the law, and you're wrong, and they don't want that.
Do Donald Trump's bidding. On the other side, these people have...
Yeah, whenever the Supreme Court does something that is constitutional and that is the correct interpretation of the law, they say it's Donald Trump's bidding. Whenever they rule, against Trump's policies, they say, well, the Supreme Court got it right this time. It's predictable. It's so predictable. Now, if you're watching this, let me know in the comments what you think. Let me know what you think about this shenanigan. Okay, should trade, now do you think, now I've given you my position, okay, should trade authority be constitutional law 101, All right, that means should it be governed by the courts since they attacked him in the courts, or should it go to Congress? And if it was meant to go to Congress, Congress should have reeled this situation in months ago. They couldn't, because what he's doing isn't flouting his constitutional powers. So what they're trying to do is do a backdoor role where they say, well, we can't block him on the constitutionality of this. Let's hobble him in the courts and force him back to the to Congress, where he won on the constitutionality of this in the first place. As a child, I hated playing games with some of my childhood acquaintances. They weren't my friends. They were my acquaintances. We happened to play on the same street. We happened to go to the same elementary school. I had no choice. I had to play with them. Did I like them? Some of them I did. I wanted them to be nice people, but most of them were cheats. And I don't like cheats. I like to play a straight game. I don't like cheats. And I had a bunch of these kids. I'm so worked up because of what I'm seeing on the screen. I had some of these kids who cheated at every turn. They cheated at every turn. They cheated at dice. They cheated at everything. And, most of them were raised that way to cheat. And as far as they were concerned, as long as the other person lost, it was fine. Once they won, the other person was a bad person. There were people that I would beat at games, and they would tell me, and they would walk me out of their house. I think it happened one time. I faintly remember this as a child. Faintly. There was a day when I was on a roll. I think we were playing dice or something, and I was on a roll. And when I say dice, it's a game called Ludo. Okay, we play with the dice, or snakes and ladders. We were playing that game. I was on a roll. I was winning, and you know what they did? They walked me out of their house. I was winning too much. I remember that faintly. So you have these Democrats who are like, you're winning too much. Let's put our thumbs on the scale. And that's what I keep seeing we have 3.5 more years of this. And we're going to continue to see this play out again and again. And we have liars on TDSBC saying everything they can to make it look like the things that Trump does are evil, bad, and destructive to the American people. But they said nothing when over 10 million illegal immigrants crossed the borders, entered into the heartland of the United States. A bunch of them committed heinous crimes against American citizens, made the country increasingly unsafe. They said nothing.
Been facing these town halls at all times and understand that Americans do not see the benefit of sweeping, unrestricted, unbounded tariffs.
I think it's obvious that going to Congress is not on the agenda of the Department of Justice. As you said, they've already said that they're going to appeal.
So remember what I said about the intelligentsia earlier? Voila. You have the intelligentsia on your screen. He is a Harvard Law School constitutional law professor. And as far as he's concerned, a legal case brought through a legal system against a sitting president shouldn't make it to the Supreme Court, because they know they would lose at the Supreme Court level, because what they're doing is lawfare. And for all intents and purposes, back to my default word, stupid. And they're like, let's take this to Congress, where we can waste time and wheel and deal and block this presidency from protecting the American economy. And that's what a member of the intelligentsia is saying.
What is peculiar about the case is not the merits. On the merits, I think Neil Katyal is right, and the 7-4 decision of this court was clearly right.
He thinks, well, what are the facts? Okay, now, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm going to just, I'll admit to that. Maybe I don't know what I'm talking about. Let me know in the comment section or in the live chat if you have some information I don't have about constitutional law and all of this hogwash. All right, but people with common sense can see when someone is gaming the system, and that's what I see here. The justices, or no, not the justices, the justices are the Supreme Court, the federal judges and their leftist supporters and talking heads on TTSBC and other leftist outlets know that if this thing goes to the Supreme Court, that Trump wins. And it's not because of we have conservative activists up there as justices who can't define what a woman is. Totally not because of that. All right, we don't have conservative activists up there. We have people who have sworn to uphold the law and to interpret the Constitution accurately, both the spirit and the letter of it. And these people know that once it gets up there, they lose. And so they're going to say everything possible to say that this isn't great, it's a bad look, and so on. All right.
The International Economic Emergency Powers Act delegates all kinds of authorities to the president, more perhaps than the framers would ever have imagined.
And that's where I would say, please just be quiet about that. Now, this is the part where they start talking about curtailing the powers of the president. From Trump's first term, you had a cabinet loaded to the gills with people whose job it was to prevent him from doing his job. Now, on his second term, he got wiser, and he has filled up his cabinet with people he knows will carry out his vision for the country and what the American people voted for. And so you have these people just saying things that that on the surface they look very benign, and he's just saying something about his opinion about this. But when you unpack how they frame these things, it's very clear that one, they try to make sure that Donald Trump doesn't wield the full weight of the presidential powers that he does have, because the same things that Obama and Joe Biden did, that all the leftist outlets kept quiet about, Donald Trump is doing, and they are losing their minds. Obama did a bunch of the same things that Donald Trump is doing today, and the leftists celebrated him like a superhero. So these guys just aren't honest. They're all liars and cheats. I need someone to just give an honest breakdown of the law and not an agenda or a narrative. All right, so I have no confidence in what he has to say next. But let's listen, and then we'll go to the comment section.
But it does not delegate to the president the power to basically replace Congress's carefully designed tariff scheme with tariffs of his own across the board on virtually every country, on almost every product.
Yeah, so I think we're done with TDSBC. I think we're done with TDSBC, because TDSBC ignores the fact that most of these countries that are being tariff the United States. They do. they tariff American companies. I think it's China or Japan tariffs American agricultural products where they can't sell their grain in China. So it's interesting to see how these people, look themselves in the mirror and claim to care for the American people and businesses in America. Let's go to the comment section. We still have someone from the TDS community released the unredacted Epstein files. You guys said it was a conspiracy theory, so you don't get a vote on that. Thanks, Lawrence. A very sober look at a sad situation. You can talk slowly and sound aloof and still lie through your teeth. So when a constitutional or when a law professor is saying that that a case that was held up by a federal judge shouldn't go to the Supreme Court, that tells you everything you need to know about that law professor. Thank you, Professor Tribe. Thank you, Ali. I need a better comment. Tariffs without doing anything about local manufacturing is like putting a band-aid on an open wound, promoting sepsis, and that goes unnoticed and would result in an amputation. And this person is clearly has only been watching MSNBC. There's trillions. Okay, let me just stop at billions of dollars in investments from other countries to build factories in the United States. So your comment makes no sense. Thank you for explaining it so well. Yeah. Never thought I would see the day people vote for more taxes on themselves for no real benefit, and they aren't even doing it legally on top. It's exhausting to watch when people who don't watch anything but MSNBC speak and they expose themselves. That's where they get their education. So you have a Democrat Party that historically is big on increasing taxes. They claim that they want to tax the rich. Meanwhile, they don't realize that in taxing the rich have a way of rolling those taxes downhill to the regular guy. You guys think that the rich are so stupid and compliant that they will just take it lying down. They will protect themselves and they will roll over the cost over onto the masses. And that's where the masses will scream, we need more control to reel in these robber barons. And then the robber barons decide, okay, we're taking our money elsewhere. And there goes the jobs in that community. And then the socialists in the crowd say you have to prevent them from leaving, just like what California, threatened to do one time. I don't know if they're still thinking of doing anything about that. They're threatening to continue taxing people who left California even years ago. That's the insanity of these guys. They think that it is their right to collect taxes even from people who no longer live in California. You have them trying to take money from people who have worked for their money, built businesses, and are basically doing their business elsewhere. They want to go out into those places and still take taxes from those people. All right, so that makes no sense. But you know what? It makes perfect sense to all the people who live on MSNBC. Sorry, did I say MSNBC? TDSBC. All right. Let's go over to Fox News because we're wrapping this up. We've been at this too long. All right. This person says, video's opening statement says most tariffs are illegal, and video caption says some tariffs are illegal. Why so? I don't understand. It is English. Some and most is the same thing. Some doesn't mean a few. Some means an amount. It doesn't mean all. If they said less, if they said less, it's a different thing. Okay? So, I would use the terms you guys like to float around. Go and educate yourself. What 39% tariffs on Swiss cheese has to do with fentanyl coming in from Mexico goes beyond my understanding, because the people who sell us or sell the United States Swiss cheese tariff the United States on other things that should be sold in those countries. All right. That's why it's called trade. It's called trade because I have a product I want to sell to you. You have a product I want to buy. And then we trade. And when we engage in fair, balanced trade, we shouldn't have tariffs. Okay? I should be able to come in and sell my products in your country, and you should be able to come into mine and sell your products without any additional markup. But that's not what these other countries have been doing, according to the reports. All right, so one more comment and then we will wrap it up. All countries and small business owners should file lawsuits and claim their losses. All right, so what losses? Please explain. If you've been paying attention to all of the conversations that have been happening, you would find that a lot of American businesses that try to grow into countries like China to actually scale and do business there have problems because, one, if you want to manufacture your intellectual property in China and you take your designs there, what they do is they clone your design, and even before your product hits the market, they've released their knockoff of your product. And you can't sue them in the Chinese courts. They steal intellectual property, there's no recourse, and then they hobble your products if you try to sell them in their countries. So I don't know, if you're paying attention to what's going on in the world and how these things work, but it's insane. Okay, for example, in Nigeria, let me give you one example of how these things work. Okay, in Nigeria, we have PayPal for Nigeria. PayPal for Nigeria only takes money out of Nigeria, doesn't allow us in Nigeria to become merchants who receive money. Why is that? I see that as that's an imbalance. All right, now you can go down the rabbit hole and find out why, and maybe it has to do with the crappy security apparatus we have in Nigeria, the corruption and so on. It could have, something to do with all of that. But that is an imbalance. And I didn't like that imbalance. For years I hated it. I couldn't trade with other countries because of that imbalance. And it hurts me and my business in Nigeria. Now, that's just a very tiny business in Africa being hobbled by an imbalance being flexed by another country or by the incompetence of your own leaders. Choose your pick. But that's me facing that in Nigeria. And then when you look at people with multi-billion-dollar companies screaming about how China does the same thing to them, in China, then you need to pay attention. So there are imbalances everywhere. And when one country decides to fix that imbalance, it's weird to see their own citizens fighting that imbalance being fixed. All right, I'm going to ask one final question. All right, this is where I ask you a question. All right. The second question I would like to ask you is this ruling a needed check or a blow to the swift economic protection? All right. Is this a check to the Trump administration's moves, or is it going to affect the projections that the Trump administration has been selling? Just give me your thoughts in the comment section. And I would love to hear from you. All right. Right, so we're at the end of our live stream. All right, so thanks for being a part of this live stream. Well, we've covered quite a number of stories. I have been quite heated on some of my reviews on the stories that we've looked at. But don't forget that you can continue to send in your comments, send in your thoughts on this if you're watching this after the fact. And please don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Hit the bell icon to be notified whenever we go live. I would love to see you in the live stream during our next session, which will be tomorrow, same time tomorrow. I'm looking forward to having you on the live stream. And until next time, God bless you. Welcome to Headlines and History, live news reactions and your views. We're about to go live soon, so grab your spot and get ready for a sharp, balanced take on today's biggest news stories with a dash of historical insight. Stay tuned. Each week, we tackle the headlines that matter: politics, economics, global events with a balanced lens. We'll react live, tie today's stories to historical moments, and spotlight your views in the chat. From trade talks echoing the 1990s to crises recalling 2008, we're here to unpack it all. Your voice drives the show. Share your thoughts or historical parallels in the live chat, and we'll dive into the best ones. It's news, context, and community all in 1 hour. We're moments away from launching Headlines and History. Stick around for live reactions, historical nuggets, and your chance to chime in. Hit the notification bell, prep your comments, and let's make sense of the news together. See you soon.